Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Wendy Griffith. Today, how will Israel respond after Iran launches a major attack with drones and missiles on the Jewish state? We'll look at how Israel may strike back, even as President Joe Biden says the U.S. will not help Israel retaliate. Chris Mitchell will bring us the story from Jerusalem. Even before the Iranian assault, Israel was preparing for another war against Iran's most powerful proxy group, Hezbollah. We'll have that story from the border between Israel and Lebanon. Here at home, Americans are stretching their finances as inflation has been driving prices higher for basic things like food and gas. We'll see what consumers have to do just to get by. And it's a big hit on Netflix, a docudrama series about the life of one of the most important figures in the Bible, Moses. These stories and much more for you today here on NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And we begin with the Israeli government deciding how to respond to the biggest drone and missile attack in history. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Israel's leaders are considering their options while allies like the U.S. are trying to restrain Israel's military response.
In its first direct strike by Iran against Israel, Iran attacked with more than 300 drones, cruise and ballistic missiles. It brought a 45-year shadow war into the light. The difference between Iran and Israel's capabilities on stark display, with reports that about half of the projectiles either failed on launch or crashed before reaching their targets. The vast majority of the rest were destroyed by Israel and its partners, including the U.S., France, Britain, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. The 99% interception rate described as a spectacular military achievement. Stunning video showed some missiles being shot down over Jerusalem. On Sunday, Israel's war cabinet met to decide how to respond. Benny Gantz said Israel will respond when the time is right, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant urged an international coalition against Iran.
Reuters is reporting that Turkey acted as a mediator between Iran and the U.S. It said Iran informed Turkey in advance of the operation, and Washington told Tehran that any action it took had to be, quote, within certain limits.
After the attack, President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talked by phone. Biden reportedly told Netanyahu, "You gotta win, take a win," and urged him to carefully think through the consequences of any retaliation. He also said the U.S. won't participate in any strike against Iran.
The president's been very clear. We don't seek a war with Iran. We're not looking for escalation here. We will continue to help Israel defend itself.
Yet some U.S. lawmakers say the U.S. should support an Israeli retaliatory strike.
I think a proportionate response here. I think one option would be to take out the facilities where these drones and rockets came from and also destroy the manufacturing facilities that build the drones and rockets.
We need to stand with Israel. Israel's not at war with Hamas or Hezbollah or Yemen. Those are all surrogates for Iran. They're prostitutes. The pimp is Iran. Israel is at war with Iran. Iran hates Americans. Iran hates Jews. Iran wants to kill Americans and Jews.
Former Israeli ambassador to the UN and Knesset member Danny Danon told CBN News he believes a great defense is not enough.
We have to show also our offensive capabilities in order to create deterrence in the region against Iran. They attacked a sovereign country with 300 rockets, missiles, and UAVs, and we cannot sit idly by. And my position is that we have to hit them hard to teach them a lesson that they will not do it again.
While the Israelis and their partners praise the air defense, some also point to the power of prayer in protecting the Jewish state.
No, I want to thank all those who pray for us and stand with us. I think last night what we saw was the hands of God protecting Israel as well.
CBN's Chuck Holton shared how he hosted a live report on YouTube in the minutes after the attack started.
As the rockets and drones were still flying toward Israel, so before we knew what would actually take place, we had 40,000 people online, I believe, and we prayed together 40,000 people. That's a stadium's worth of people. As we've prayed that God would thwart the plans of evil men, he came through last night and he answered our prayer. And that's a very significant thing that I think we can't forget.
Amen. Indeed. Well, Chris Mitchell is with us now from Jerusalem. Chris, we'll talk more about prayer in just a moment because that is so crucial. But first, I want to ask you, the Israeli War Cabinet reportedly believes they should strike back, but they're divided over how to do it. What are you hearing?
Well, yesterday they met for about 4 hours, Wendy, and in fact, it appears like they're meeting right now exactly how they're going to respond. It's clear that Israel will respond. We understand that the IDF has presented plans and options to the War Cabinet. Whether or not how they do that remains to be seen. Congressman McCall said maybe they could strike those drones or the factories that built those and the ballistic missiles. They could also strike Iran's oil production, even its nuclear sites, something that people have been talking about for years. Could be cyber attacks. Right now, and reportedly, Benny Gantz, who's in the War Cabinet, and also retired General Gadi Eisenkot, they recommend hitting Iran actually while the attack was underway. When I have to say, it was quite a night for Israelis the other night, and for myself and many of us here in the Bureau. Many were watching the news literally as the drones and missiles were on their way. I happened to be in the Galilee at the time. I was driving back late at night. I arrived here just in time to hear the explosions over Jerusalem.
Over Jerusalem. Wow. Well, many analysts here in the U.S. are saying that Iran crossed a red line, Chris, by attacking Israel itself for the very first time rather than going after Israeli embassies outside the country. Does the Israeli government see it that way, too, that this was an unprecedented attack by Iran?
Well, definitely unprecedented, a historic attack. No other nation has launched so many drones and ballistic and cruise missiles against another country. Some are saying it's maybe a strategic blunder by Iran right now, and they may have overplayed their hand. One expert that I was talking to said they handed Rafah on a silver platter to Israel, meaning that the attention is no longer on Gaza, but on Iran. Temporarily, at least, Wendy, it seems like Israel has the world on their side, and this kind of puts Iran in a bad light internationally. And what it also showed, Wendy, was the flaws in their missile program. Many of these missiles never made it out of Iran. And I'll tell you something I saw on social media in terms of the drones, that Amazon deliveries are faster than some of their drones.
Oh, dear. Wow. They're not going to like that. Okay, Israel, Chris, and its allies shot down virtually all the incoming drones and missiles, as you just mentioned. But do those defensive weapons cost Israel a lot of money? And what else do we learn about Israel's defenses?
Yeah, well, those interceptors, sometimes they cost thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, just for one of those interceptors. On the other hand, you have relatively low-cost drones coming, but those ballistic missiles as well. Part of the strategy, Wendy, was to overwhelm the anti-missile system. But actually, it was a tremendously impressive counter-strategy that was built over several years of anti-missile layers, beginning with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, also the coordination with the UK, the US, France, and really just an impressive layers of anti-missile strategy. Many of them, those the U.S. allies, and as I noted, some of the Abraham Accords nations, like the UAE and perhaps a future Abraham Accord nation like Saudi Arabia.
Chris, what's the response there to President Biden saying the U.S. will not help Israel if it retaliates against Iran? Because, in fact, it was helping block some of those missiles the other night, right?
Yeah. Well, they'll help defensively, but they really don't want to go on the offense. They don't want to be offensive, have an offensive plan along with Israel to attack and retaliate against Iran. Maybe given their restraints over Gaza. It's not surprising. And the Biden administration, going back to the Obama administration, and many of the same officials are in both cabinets, there's a history of appeasement with Iran. Now, some have told me that there's maybe an opportunity, given the favor that Israel has just temporarily, maybe they can restore those sanctions on Iran. But the question is, Wendy, if Israel does attack, where it's going to be, when it's going to be, and what's going to be against.
And Chris, how does all of this affect the war against Hamas? There's a report from an Israeli broadcaster that Prime Minister Netanyahu has decided to postpone the invasion of Rafah. Have you heard anything along those lines?
Well, we've also heard that they've called up 2 reserve brigades. I have heard that, but I've also heard, Wendy, that maybe we're in the early stages of trying to get into Rafah. And as I said before, it's possible that the shift has gone from Gaza to Iran. And one person I talked to earlier said it may have put Rafah on a silver platter for Israel.
Chuck Holton talked about the prayers that were going up for Israel and the role it played in protecting that country. What are religious leaders in Israel saying about what happened?
Well, you know, Wendy, Israel's first Prime Minister Ben-Gurion famously said, in Israel, to be a realist, you have to believe in miracles. And many people believe that what happened the other night was just miraculous. Without taking anything away from the anti-missile defense set up for years, it was almost biblical, the outcome of that night. 350 projectiles, 99% rate of shooting them down. Many people believe that was a miracle that we saw in action.
And no casualties?
Just one casualty. It's actually a 7-year-old Bedouin girl was tragically hit by that, but that was about it. And very, very little physical damage.
Wow. It did seem like the hand of God was outstretched over Israel. We will continue to pray. Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem, thanks as always for your insights. Please stay safe and know that many people are praying for you and our staff there in Jerusalem. God bless you. Well, coming up, while Israel is focused on Iran after the attack over the weekend, it's also been preparing for war on its northern border with Hezbollah. We'll bring you that story with George Thomas when we come back. As Israel is dealing with how to strike against Iran, it's also been keeping a close eye on Tehran's most powerful proxy army, Hezbollah, in southern Lebanon. George Thomas traveled to the border city of Kiryat Shimona before the Iranian attack and brings us this story.
Toby Abutbul knows just how fortunate he is to be still alive. February 13th at 11:08 in the morning, Abutbul was driving down Main Street in Kiryat Shimona, a city in northern Israel near Lebanon's border, when his car's dash cam captures the moment a Hezbollah missile lands a few feet away from him.
I was driving on the streets of the city, and an anti-tank missile hits right in front of me with no warning. There wasn't even a siren sound warning of an incoming missile.
He immediately stops, puts his car in park, turns on the hazard lights, jumps out and takes cover behind his car. 10 seconds later, the second missile hits, injuring a mother and her child. And then come the sirens. 3 months earlier, on November 2nd, Hezbollah launched a barrage of 12 missiles at northern Israel, 2 of the missiles hitting right next to Abutbul's restaurant. Surveillance video shows the moment his father and 2 siblings enter the family restaurant and the missile's impact fling them to the floor, but not seriously injured.
It was scary. My little sisters and father were here with me, but we quickly got into the bunker, and we understood that there's no room for playing games. This is very serious.
5 months later, he's nervous about what's coming.
I believe Israel and Hezbollah are going to go to war.
The traffic lights here in downtown Kiryat Shimona are blinking because there's, as you can see, hardly any traffic to speak of. It's a scene that is played out pretty much all along the Israel-Lebanon border. Some 60,000 Israelis forced to evacuate from cities like this. But you know, back in 2006, when Israel and Hezbollah were last at war, the circumstances and the situations were much different. And today, Hezbollah is a much more powerful army. What is different about this conflict compared to 2006?
Hezbollah is different. Hezbollah is much stronger, much more munition, accurate missiles, and a capability of invasion.
Every day.
Former IDF intelligence officer Sarit Zahavi is a leading expert on Hezbollah. She's tracked the various weapons being used by the terror group here in the north since October 8th, the day after the Hamas massacre. In addition to more than 3,000 rockets, Zahavi says for the first time Hezbollah began firing more advanced Iranian-made weapons like the Almas-1 anti-tank guided missile.
Low-flying, long-flying, short-range, very accurate, no alerts, no Iron Dome cannot intercept
Israel
this.
cannot protect itself from the infrared.
Only if they are launched against tanks, but they are usually launched against everything else. Everything, not just everything, civilian, military, whatever.
In January, Hezbollah released this video reportedly showing an Alma-1 with a camera attached to its nose targeting an IDF intelligence base.
Instead of a terrorist organization, we are facing a terrorist army. Army that has around 200,000 different kind of missiles, drones, rockets, mortars, different types, can get to everywhere in Israel.
Hezbollah is also believed to have about 100,000 fighters.
Hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists took part in what they described as a military maneuver.
The so-called tip of Hezbollah's spear is the Radwan Force, an elite squad of up to 3,000 fighters focused on infiltrating Israel's northern border.
Since they participated in the civil war in Syria, their ground forces are much more professionals, much more equipped, and even, even motivated to carry out the ground invasion because, during the years, Hezbollah mobilized them that this is their mission.
IDF released video of a strike in South Lebanon that allegedly took out a senior Radwan commander. Fighter jets also struck a reported Radwan military compound.
Since Hezbollah opened the northern front against Israel, IDF attacked 4,000 targets in Lebanon. 10% of these are against the commando units of Hezbollah. This is a very impressive number.
Zahavi says a major challenge the IDF would face in a full-scale war would be trying to identify Hezbollah foot soldiers and weapons depots. As CBN discovered on a recent trip inside South Lebanon, the terror group is very adept at hiding within the civilian population.
Hezbollah, like Hamas, is entrenched in the villages using the Lebanese human shields. Everything you saw happening in Gaza with regard to hiding the munition in the hospitals and in the mosques and in the homes, it exists the same way with Hezbollah.
Israeli military has announced it's preparing to move from defense to attack regarding operations on the northern border. Experts predict war between Hezbollah and Israel is likely within the next 6 to 8 months.
I know the IDF is here. Yeah. I know that we are much more prepared than we used to be. And yet I'm worried.
Zahavi's home here in northern Israel sits less than 5 miles from Hezbollah military positions.
We are not willing to sleep next to this monster anymore. We want the threat to be dealt because what we have learned that once they have the capability to slaughter us, eventually they will use this capability. The only way to fight this is to try to eliminate or at least damage as much as possible this capability.
George Thomas, CBN News, Northern Israel.
Great reporting. Thank you, George Thomas. Still ahead, the battles between Israel and Iran could drive up the cost of oil, making inflation even worse. Americans are already having a hard time with high prices. We'll show you how they're getting by right after this. With inflation still rising for important everyday needs like food and gas, Americans are having a hard time just making ends meet. As Lori Johnson tells us, many are getting by with credit cards.
It comes as no surprise to anyone paying for food, rent, or gasoline that prices are higher. With March inflation higher than predicted, there are new doubts on the Fed's goals to lower interest rates.
It is a hot print and it is sticky. There's no indication that these rates are going substantially lower anytime soon.
That means buyers will continue to pay higher interest on things like home and car loans.
So what's causing it? It's simply the government spending too much money because the government also controls our currency. And that's a deadly combination.
The typical American household spends $270 more per month on everyday goods than 1 year ago, and over $1,000 per month more from 3 years ago, before inflation shot up to over 9% in 2022.
The rising prices mean more Americans are using credit cards than ever before. The average household balance is about $11,000. All combined, our nationwide outstanding credit card debt is a staggering new high, $1.3 trillion.
Most troubling is that nearly half of users can't pay their monthly balance.
It means specifically that people are relying a lot on credit to get by month to month. And that is not a great long-term tactic.
That's because most annual percentage rates hover around 21%.
Credit card debt can snowball very quickly because of the interest rates.
A recent survey found 1 in 4 Americans feel very stressed about their credit card debt.
You can get in over your head very quickly with credit cards.
Sometimes you can avoid the pitfalls.
You can get a credit card that has a 0% APR on it, and you can do a balance transfer.
Or ask for help.
Talk to your lenders or your credit card companies. Give them a call if you can't pay your bills on time. They want to work with you.
In some cases, companies will reduce the minimum payment, interest rate, and fees, as well as offer a structured payment plan. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Lori, coming up, the story of Moses is a big hit on Netflix. We'll bring you a look at this new docudrama series about the life of one of the most important figures in the Bible when we come back. A 3-part docudrama series about Moses has landed among Netflix's top 10 most popular series. It's called Testament, the story of Moses, and it debuted on the streaming platform in March as the #1 show. And since then, the series shows Moses' remarkable life as a prince, prophet, and more, with insights from theologians and historians. It details with his human side as well, including his flaws and what he had to do to overcome in life. You can get the full story about Moses, this new series, on CBNnews.com. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel anytime or online with CBNnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen today by emailing us at newswatch@cbn.com. Have a great day.